Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck, Cam Newton, Arch Manning. Players whose physical ability and on-field play were so great that they had NFL teams fighting over them like they were the last roll of toilet paper in 2020. Trevor Lawrence, 6'5", with a strong arm, and most importantly, as a true freshman, he led Clemson through the dynasty that is Alabama in the national championship. Cam Newton at 6'5", 250 was an absolute force who was able to run and throw all over defenses, and he coasted to an undefeated season in a national championship. Andrew Luck at 6'4", 240 with one of the best football minds we've ever seen led Stanford, not exactly a powerhouse, to an 11-win season. And finally, the best of them all, the heir to the Manning throne, Arch Manning, he hasn't really done anything yet. Here's the thing, Arch's name really doesn't belong in these kind of groups, but people keep trying to put him there, and it's easy to see why. He's a Manning, he plays for Texas, and he's more athletic than Eli and Peyton ever were. To put the athletic gap in perspective, here's Eli and Peyton's combine stat. Arch hasn't actually done a 40-yard dash, so I can't compare it perfectly, but he's estimated somewhere between a 4.62 and a 4.65. And as great as all that is, his family name and his physical abilities aren't going to gift him wins. When he goes to Ohio State on week 1, they're not just going to let him win because he tells them his name is Arch Manning. He's going to have to earn it. He's going to have to outplay them. And his name and his size aren't going to do that for him. He's going to have to do it himself. The media has steadily poured gasoline on the Arch Manning hype firestorm the whole summer, and just when I thought it was over, Paul Feinbaum did the most unthinkable thing and dropped an entire tanker of oil on an already out-of-control fire. Maybe the most insane take I've ever heard. He said that Arch Manning is the best college player since Tim Tebow. Now, I could go into the fact that we're skipping right over so many incredible players to get to Arch Manning, but that's beside the point. The big point is Arch Manning has not done enough to be held in these conversations. To put my point in perspective a little better, I've put 3 players in front of you. Tell me whether Arch Manning is A, B, or C. If you're having trouble guessing, that's probably because none of those are Arch Manning. This is Arch's actual stat line. Here's who these players with comparable or better stat lines actually are. A was Jake Bentley in 2016 when he was a true freshman. Jake Bentley went on to have a mediocre stretch at South Carolina before transferring to Utah and ultimately ending his career at South Alabama. Not quite generational, but let's take a look at the other 2. B was DJ Uiagalelei. DJ was also 5 stars with a lot of talent, and he showed promise, but he never developed into what people expected him to be. He left Clemson after 3 years and winded up with Oregon State and finally Florida State. Another disappointing player who showed promise early, but never really lived up to it. And finally, C, as you saw, had a pretty incredible season. C was none other than Tim Tebow in his sophomore year. But that season that he had is the one that Arch is going to have this season, at least according to analysts. Tebow, as a true sophomore and his first year starting, threw for 3,286 yards and 32 touchdowns, as well as 895 yards rushing and 23 rushing touchdowns with only 6 interceptions. Add on to that a Heisman Trophy and a national championship. Is it possible Arch could have a season like this? Sure. But you could say that about a lot of guys. The fact of the matter is, Arch was in his 2nd year last season, and that same season for Tebow's career was the one that we just listed. Arch is a redshirt sophomore. Tebow was a true sophomore. They're the same year. Arch is running way behind if he's going to be the next best thing, and there are many other far more deserving players to be thrown in that conversation the past 10 or so years. In fact, I'd argue there are multiple players right now who should be way above him in that conversation. Let's ask ourselves honestly, if this was some guy named Arch Johnson, would anybody be talking about him this way, or really at all? Look at this comparison, for example. In his first game where he actually got to play a lot, DJ Lagway played against Samford, and he threw 18 of 25 for 456 yards and 3 touchdowns. Is this worthy of being talked about, even though it's against Samford? I'd say yes. Does it mean that Lagway should be in the same conversation as Tebow yet? I think we all know the answer to that is no. And Lagway is a great player in my opinion. I think he's going to have a great season, but if you look at his season as a whole last year, when he actually started playing against better teams, you can see that his stats dropped a lot, and suddenly his season looked pretty bad actually. I'd argue he's much better than his stats suggested, but that's a different point for a different video. The point I'm getting at is that Arch Manning's only games where he got significant playing time were against bad teams that didn't really prove much. I'd say the way he played against UTSA and Mississippi State was impressive, but not enough to put him at the front of the Heisman race. The only significant reps he got after that was against Georgia, where he was thrown into a tough spot and understandably didn't look very good. It was a very brief sample size, and I'm certainly not faulting him at all being thrown into a game like that, but that's the only high-level team he got meaningful reps against. In that game, he went 3 of 6 for 19 yards, and he got sacked twice, including a fumble. Throw in a decent game earlier in the season against ULM, and that's it. He only threw 12 other passes the whole season. That's all we needed to see of him to say he's the next best thing since Tebow. Now that I've shown you somebody who's not likely to be the next Tebow, let's take a look at somebody I think could be. I'm talking about none other than LaNorris Sellers. I'll get into stats in a minute, but to me, you can't compare someone to Tebow unless they have those fiery plays where all odds are against them and they will their team to win. Plays like this where 2 defenders have him dead to rights in the backfield and he escapes the sack and throws the ball away. Or how about this play where he's swarmed by 3 people, escapes the sack, jukes another defender, and then runs for 38 yards. And of course, I can't leave out this play from the same game with 1:18 left on 3rd and 16 when LaNorris ran through the whole Clemson defense for the touchdown and ultimately the win in a big rivalry game. Now let's back up and look at LaNorris' season as a whole. LaNorris threw for 2,534 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. He also ran for 674 yards and 7 touchdowns. Still not numbers really all that close to Tebow, but check this out. LaNorris' last 6 games were against Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Wofford, Clemson, and Illinois. 5 of them were ranked at the time they played, and 3 of them were still ranked at the end of the season. So clearly a stretch where they played good teams. In that stretch, LaNorris threw for 261 yards and 2.2 touchdowns per game. He also ran for 71.2 yards per game and had about 0.66 rushing touchdowns per game in this stretch. If LaNorris had played this well since the beginning of the season, and if he hadn't missed some time with an injury, this is what his end-of-season numbers would have looked like. 3,393 yards passing, 28.6 touchdowns, 6.5 interceptions, 925.6 yards rushing, and 8.66 rushing touchdowns. Alright, so obviously these stats aren't actually what he finished with, but 6 games is a pretty good sample size, especially since he was playing good teams. And that's what his numbers would have been if he averaged those same numbers the whole season. Now let's throw that Tebow graphic up one more time with this hypothetical LaNorris Sellers stat line next to it. You'll notice they look remarkably similar. For LaNorris to have a Tebow level season, all he has to do is take what he did at the end of last season and do it for the whole year. This doesn't even take into consideration the possibility that LaNorris, being only a redshirt sophomore coming into this year, gets better, and that is why Paul Feinbaum is wrong. Arch Manning is not the next Tebow. LaNorris Sellers is. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, it would be a huge help if you could like and subscribe. This is a brand new channel and any support would be much appreciated.